All right, we're moving on. Share with you Sunday. Have you guys been looking for a way to give back to the community? There's so many different ways that you can do that. I mean, we're going to talk about a lot of them, everything from hosting a Facebook fundraiser for your birthday to just liking and sharing our content really allows other people to find us, whether on Facebook or on Instagram, on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn. There, I think I'm remembering all of them, Josh. My head hurts. I grew up when MySpace was very exciting, so you'll have an idea. Well, I grew up when passing notes on a piece of paper was exciting. I know Tammy will agree with that. All right, but here's one of the ways that you can actually give back in a way that people have been talking about. So there is a study that is trying to create parameters and guidelines when it comes to exercise for individuals who have had an aortic dissection. And I know that people talk about this all the time. What can I lift? How much strenuous activity can I do? Like, what can I do? So this research study that is based out of UT Houston, so University of Texas, Houston, led by Dr. Siddharth Prakash, who is actually the doctor that answers all of your questions on our Ask a Doctor event every other month on Facebook. He's leading the charge with this exercise study, and it's actually in 3 different states. So one of the community members named Jack Crow, he actually just started I think it's called Aortic Athletes Facebook page. Growing. It's growing and growing and growing very quickly. I think he just started that. He's actually very lucky enough that he got to recently participate. So when I saw that he was going to talk about it, I knew like I had to grab his story. I was so glad that he offered it to us. And this is what he says. So cardiologists are actually now recruiting for aortic dissection survivors to participate in the first year-long study on the effect of exercise on physical and mental health. And last week, he found out exactly what it was like to participate in the study. So he drove 10 hours from his cabin in the faraway Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where it had been snowing in Ann Arbor, which is the home of University of Michigan Wolverines and a world-class medical center, including an aortic center. So led by University of Texas at Houston, University of Michigan, and Washington University at St. Louis are jointly participating in this study. So there's your 3 locations. And so he drove to a University of Michigan hospital that was an outpatient center where they were conducting this study. So driving all the way to participate in a study sounds like a long way to go, but actually his daughter lives in Ann Arbor, so he got to visit her, which is kind of cool. And as an aortic dissection survivor who laments the absence of much sound science on exercise for survivors, he felt a personal stake in the outcome. And many people who are, I say, athletes or just extremely physically into exercise and their physical well-being, they're also very excited about this study. Look, I'm excited about this study, even though I can't do what half of those people are doing. I'm excited as well. So a woman named Christine from the university was waiting for Jack and introduced him to this other woman named Lauren, who was in administration. So Michigan's goal was to sign up 42 people in this study, which is kind of a tall order because, again, they can only be individuals who have had an aortic dissection. And aortic dissection is very rare. Being a survivor is kind of rare. And people that are willing to travel to Michigan or Houston or St. Louis twice during a 12-month time period to do certain types of exercises for a year as part of the study, that's rare too. So now you've got all these 3 different rare scenarios in order to find 42 people. The randomized process actually placed Jack into the study and not in the control group. So it's important to note that those that are in the control group, they will actually come back in a year without the benefit of the exercise program, also still serve as purpose. And without a control group, there really is no benchmark. So Jack actually started by answering a series of questions on his dissection, which he expected. And he also answered some questions about his mental health and levels of pain and energy, which he did not expect. But he has to admit that 2 years post-dissection, he deals with a fair amount of upper back pain, and his energy level, which is improved from immediately post-dissection, is not really where he was pre-dissection. I think we could probably all say the same thing is true for us. That said, he did get a lot of exercise, mostly walking up to around 15 hours a week. So Lauren and Christine fitted him with a blood pressure cuff. This is the first step after answering questions. Fitted Jack with a blood pressure cuff, which was his companion for the next 24 hours. So there are specific 24-hour blood pressure monitors that you can wear. And it basically measured his every 30 minutes, it would go off. So wherever you are, it's going to go off every 30 minutes. They brought him to the fitness center, and there was a cardiac fitness instructor present, took him through a round of exercises, including a cycling warm-up, wall sitting, arm curling with a 10-pound weight. So we're not talking about big weights here. Hand strength test, leg raises, uphill treadmill jog, all while taking blood pressure readings. Those were the exercises he had to do. Any spikes of systolic blood pressure above 160, that's your top number, he would be excluded from the study right away. And his tended to stay mostly in the 110s or lower. What? That's crazy. Mine would definitely be in the 140s. That's like insane. Okay, so he repeats these exercises 3 to 5 times a week for the next year, and then returns to Ann Arbor, Michigan to see if there's any improvement in his blood pressure or his mental health. So it's so interesting. Those lists of exercises we told you, 3 times a week, 3 to 5 times a week for the next year, and then goes back for a follow-up. So the hope is that more sedentary dissection survivors will actually begin to exercise, movement from movement, some of the things we're talking about, as part of this study, and see that there are going to be positive benefits mentally and physically after a year of steady, albeit modest exercise. Again, we're not talking about exercise that's going to propel your blood pressure high. And for Jack, the biggest takeaway was actually being introduced to the RPE scale. That is the rate of perceived exertion. I've had this scale asked of me. I'm not sure if you did. I've had it asked of me while I was in physical therapy. Your rate of your perceived exertion.
Yes. During
which
cardiac rehab.
Very different than your actual exertion,
Right.
which that's kind of like the mental component here. But it considers exertion on a scale of 1 to 10, which we're going to see on this chart. 1 being hardly any exertion and 10 being the maximum possible exertion. And in the middle is moderate activity. So you should be able to carry on a conversation when you're doing these exercises. And vigorous activity would be maybe you're short of breath, but you can at least speak a sentence. So let's take a look at this real quick. So this is the rate of perceived exertion, or your RPEs. So again, a 10 would be you just can't go on anymore. Like, I'm going to just completely collapse if I take another step or I lift another bar, whatever the case is. I'm totally unable to talk. I'm completely out of breath. That's a 10. And if we're looking at moderate activity and your perceived exertion is like a 4 to 6, that would mean you're kind of sort of breathing a little bit heavily, right? You can hold a short conversation. You're still somewhat comfortable. But things are becoming a little bit more noticeably challenging for you. And then it goes all the way down to light activity or very light activity that says hardly any exertion. You feel hardly anything, a little bit more than just sleeping. I don't know what that would be, what activity it would be. It would be watching Love is Blind on Netflix. Okay, that's what it would be. So there's your rate of perceived exertion. Okay. There is a link here to see a video presentation by Dr. Prakash, which you can watch, that actually explains this study. And so this is one of those studies that, yes, you can participate in the community, but please go talk to your physician. Let your doctor tell you if you're able to do these exercises that they're going to require of you 3 times a week for the next year. So there is a commitment, and you need to be able to be committed in order for us to get the right outcomes. You only get out of this what people are willing to put into it. So you can find this by the blog post, or you can click resources. There is a link to research studies, and check it out and see if this is something that you want to participate in. What is everybody's thoughts about this? I'm tired after reading it. My rate of perceived exertion right now is at a 4.
Yeah, I didn't find any. I'm in Delaware. I didn't find any that were within driving distance for me.
No. Unfortunately, it would be great if he paired up with like Hopkins or something like that, but I know this is really building up some steam, and I know he's very excited about it. And I honestly am really excited to see these outcomes. While I might not go to the extreme of where the recommendations are, restrictions are, it's just nice to know that we're trying to study a population.
I'm happy that they're studying it too.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, how many times are we asked or we read online, what can I do?
And
You know?
you said when I first met you that we were like the new generation or the first generation of survivors. So they didn't have people to study before us.
No. And what we mean when we say that is 10, 15 years ago, when you read on Google that the mortality rate was just so high at 5 years and even higher at 10 years after a dissection, really who they're talking about are people that were not monitored. And 70% of people with aortic disease were not monitored because we've only identified about 36 aortopathies or aortic related genes. So that's really, I believe, represents about 30%. It's like a statistic in there. Don't quote me because I'm not a physician. Somewhere in there of the population of aortic disease community members have a known genetic mutation or something that is hereditary that they know. So it's 70% of us that they were sending home. Like if you didn't have Marfan's or Loewe Dietz or VEDS, I don't even know if Turner syndrome was discovered then. Definitely ACTA2, I don't believe was. If you didn't have any of these things, you were just said you're fixed, go home, because they didn't know that they had to follow you. And then the mortality rates were growing, and then they realized, well, there must be something here. So let's follow all these people that don't have a known syndrome. And they started seeing, they were finding that they were getting aneurysms, they were having repeat surgeries. Well, as they started fixing them, their life expectancy was being prolonged. It was good. We're part of that now generation where they understand they have to follow through. We're not just being dismissed after surgery. We're not a one and done, is what it is. We're a lifetime of being monitored. So that's great.
A couple points on that.
That's where you have to advocate for yourself, because one of the ways I found you was mine was 4 years ago. And just 4 years ago, I was dismissed and told that I was fixed and I didn't need to see that doctor anymore. So
I can't believe it. When you told me that, I was like, no.
That was just 4 years ago.
I know.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So what were you saying, Josh?
Yeah, a couple points there. Dr. Uleman definitely has a great stance. He says that typically a surgeon only has to work on a patient for that one-off. They show up, it's an emergency, they make their repair, and then they send them on their way. And that's like a typical surgeon. And he was saying during the caregiver meeting, he was like, it's very interesting that as a surgeon now, I get to be a part of a family medical professional because, we're going to test their children, we're going to test their family, and we might be engaged with them from a surgical standpoint for the rest of their life. And so, these thoracic surgeons are family doctors in the surgical field, and it's kind of a unique scenario. Also,
100% true.
Yeah. Also, he was giving us a history lesson, and way back, they used to try to do a full repair of an aorta, a type A and B at the same time, and the survival rate there was like dismal. And at one point, some doctor was just like, you know what we're gonna do? We're going to repair the A. We're going to let this person heal. We're going to monitor the B, and then we're going to go back in when it's necessary. And that change alone was a massive increase in the survival rate.
Yeah. Massive. I mean, when I went in, I had an ascending dissection. As I was put under and they were doing surgery, I then became a type B because I split all the way down to my left iliac. And the doctor just looked and was like, well, that just happened. Okay, let's keep going back to what we're doing, because they now, like you said, now know that you can just medically manage somebody. Everything looked stable, and that's how it's going to stay until anything changes. But it's amazing, because anybody who has a surgeon that says we're good here, have your relationship with your cardiologist. I guess I kind of can see that surgeon's point of view, but I prefer surgeons that are like Dr. Udelman, that are like my surgeon, that believe that they're now like a family physician. I mean, my surgeon flat out told me, I'm going to know you for the rest of both of our lives, whoever goes first. That's when I guess the relationship changes. And it's true. I'm very close to all my doctors.
He also had one other point. He was saying there's nothing wrong with having a cardiologist look at your scan, but they're not the ones that do the operation, and it's in your best interest to have a surgeon look at your scan. I feel like that's a message we want to make sure that the community really starts to embrace, the self-advocation, as well as making sure a surgeon is looking at the thing that was repaired.
Yeah, we do talk a lot about the importance of having your scans done at the exact same facility, time and time again. And that's because it's the same type of machinery that's being used to perform that diagnostic test. I never go by what those results are. I'm not saying that a radiologist does not know what they're saying, right? But radiologists read things different. They just do. They read them differently. Some measure out to out, some measure in to out, in to in. They measure the aorta differently, diagonally versus horizontally. Those 2 or 3 millimeters can make a difference if someone's about to have surgery. So I ignore it as much as I can, and I wait until my surgeon places that scan film over the last one, and then he compares the measurements, because he knows where he's measuring. He knows what's going to dictate to him when he thinks it's time to step in. So he will literally lay the films next to each other from 6 months prior, and he can determine exactly what size difference there is. And so these nuances, they're critical. They're really critical. I've had radiologists tell me it's one size, and I've had my surgeon say, no, it's not. Why are you freaking out? It's not. I am looking at your film. It is not that size. I see where they think it's that size, but that's not the size that I believe it is that I'm going to go with. And you got to trust that. So it's important.
You know what else I think is pretty amazing is the new 3D printing. Right? So the surgeon's going to be able to look and hold a 3D printed aorta. And I mean, when you're wondering what the measurement is, like the 3D printing can't be wrong.
Yeah, so it takes a few hours. I don't know how long it really takes, but I know we've spoken with Dr. Stacy Fisher, cardiogeneticist, cardiologist out of Hopkins, and they're doing that now often, printing a personalized 3D model of your heart and your aorta that they can actually take apart and look inside. Like, what? That's so space age. They are as prepared as you can possibly be for surgery. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's not happening at a lot more of the aortic disease centers around the country. It's not happening at your local regional hospital. I would be stunned, but it is going to happen at your larger hospital or your aortic disease center. And so that's a whole other interesting change that's going to come down. You're going to have personalized, developed grafts and for your body. It's incredible. It's incredible. Just the changes in 8 years that I've seen, the changes you've seen in 4 years. I mean, things are steadily, technologically becoming amazing.
Okay. Rob jumped into the chat and said, love the added information. Thank you very much. And then 3 heart emojis.
Thanks.
I don't know which Rob this is. There's no last name. It just says Rob.
2 B's or 1?
1 B.
Okay. Not too sure I know either, but thank you, Rob.
Here's a good question. Diane says, could aortic dissection have been out longer but never recognized? And,
it's been out for so long. Yeah.
Well, remember we were talking about like exhuming parents that had quote unquote died of a heart attack to find out that there was an aortic dissection that took place. And so we know that it's the most or that it's one of the premier undiagnosed or underdiagnosed lethal things that can happen to you. But yeah, I would say that even like when we say, or when we hear the words, this is the first generation of survivors that we can study. It's because of that. It's because we're learning about this. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're really like that first generation where they've realized that following us is making a world of difference in mortality rates being significantly decreased. And we're also the generation that's promoting the importance of thinking outside of that box. And so now we're finding more people have a better chance at an early diagnosis, decreased transport time, better prognosis, because doctors are being trained to think aorta. It's two very simple words that's making a big difference, because the first generation are squawking it so much. We're talking about it so much. But there are many people that do not perform autopsies, many people that don't have them done for personal, religious, whatever the reasons may be, circumstantial. And you're right. Oftentimes when people die suddenly, people will say that was just a massive heart attack. And what they have found is, no, it actually probably wasn't. It probably was something aortic related. So yes, to Diane's point, probably further on in your DNA family history, although there's enough people that also have a dissection of their patient X, first one in their family. And now you've set off a scavenger hunt to figure out why this has happened. Okay, share with you Sunday.